The paper that we wrote was curious about whether mindfulness as it's practiced now in the modern age is too oriented towards just stress relief. Because those that have practiced mindfulness for some time see it not just as an immediate solve that helps move through life's challenges, but that actually gives us the tools to engage with more difficult issues. And that's why we like the idea of it's not stress that's killing us, it's hate, because as our world becomes increasingly more divisive, what we want mindfulness to do is to equip people to have the awareness, to see where they're at, the clarity or objectivity to their own ideas, see where our attachments are, and then to be able to look at an opposing view and engage with it with more curiosity, with more acceptance. And when you look at the bulk of the research, there are some funny things that are happening. So first, although people tend to understand mindfulness as something that should enable engagement or wisdom or compassion, the research itself, empirically, it's a bit of a mixed bag. And in our work, we ended up looking really closely at how we're measuring mindfulness and how the different facets of mindfulness, whether it's attention, like present moment awareness, like actually feel your breath coming in and out right now, and whether our attitude, so if any of you were like, am I breathing right? Oh, my mind keeps wandering. That's bad. I should come back to the practice. These judgments that we have, the attachments we have to our judgment and the narrative represents the attitudinal component of mindfulness. So being able to be more accepting, more curious, more non-judgmental. But when we actually measure acceptance and non-judgment, this is where things tend to go wrong. So if you are a novice practitioner, acceptance ends up showing up more like avoidance. So that thing is hard. I'm just going to not go to that party or not go to that dinner where I'm going to have to talk about these sticky issues. Or it's passivity, which is like, I know I don't like what's happening, so I'm going to stay present, or I'll pay attention to something else, or I'll calm myself, but I'm not actually going to engage. I like to call this the doormat syndrome, because we can, the more you practice, you have these resources that allow you to withstand more. But if we're not engaging or pushing back, then it's kind of all for naught. So in a really short nutshell, that's the essence of what our research was. And I hope that's helpful. Are there any questions or comments that I can help with while I'm here? Okay, if there's not, I want to leave you with one last idea. And it's not data that's published yet. So currently I am analyzing interviews conducted with members from the community of mindfulness, which many people have actually called a white space and have criticized for being inaccessible. And it's such a beautiful oxymoron, because the premise essentially of mindfulness is that it's for everyone. Every human could practice this. And in fact, its origins come from non-white spaces. So this got confusing. And one of my favorite ideas that are coming out of this set of interviews is what I'm calling blindfulness, which is sort of the lack of awareness, the innocence and the good intentions of mindfulness practitioners, or people that have brought mindfulness practices to the West, that weren't able to see how white it was and how that might have made it uncomfortable for many people to come to this practice. Thanks, Stephen. thought it was hilarious myself. And the more that we can be intentional about honoring just our own good intentions and what they might blind us from in our own community is so important, because increasingly mindfulness is being offered to so many people as, you know, this is going to help with your mental health. This is going to help with X, Y, and Z. And really, it's going to help with every single problem on earth these days, if you look at the headlines. But again, if it's not resonating or feeling accessible to everyone, then we're just perpetuating a bit of a pickle. So thank you for having me. Again, I'll pause for a moment if there's no questions, and then if there's not, I shall bow out.
Dr. Choi, I have a question.
Oh, wonderful.
You know, you related, and thank you so much for bringing this to light. You related hate to mindfulness, you know, and the relationship between the two. How do you unpack hate, which is so heavily, you know, which is so heavy, which is, you know, a very heavy negative. It's not just a feeling, it's sometimes it's a belief as well. How do you unpack that in relation to being mindful?
What a beautiful question. Part of why I think hate is so popular is because it's filling a void of disconnection. People are finding belonging in these groups where they've felt so alone. And so you hang on to these ideologies, and suddenly you're part of a community, and it fuels you with connection, blanketing, covering up the disconnection from ourselves. And I think there's something very powerful in mindfulness, which brings you back to what I like to call your big S self. So the self that is aware and observing of all experience with total objectivity. And that's where true connection exists. So I think mindfulness helps because it slows you down, makes you more aware. And when you get to this, well, you know, Kabat-Zinn will say it's the awareness that arises when you're paying attention on present, to present moment and non-judgmentally. So it's not just present moment awareness, it's this meta awareness. And meta awareness gives you space to disentangle hate, or allows you to see clearly the roots of hate and why it's so addictive. And in place of that, it might connect you to actual love, actual belonging that starts more inward in order to bridge you to others. That's one person's perspective.
Thank you. I think we need a really more than a session to just you know, talk about this.
Yeah, well, enjoy. And Dr. Abram,
I have a question.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Abib, go
I'm
ahead.
a chaplain in a long-term care home, and I wonder, it seems chaotic when you're dealing with different residents with different health issues. How can you provide some form of mindfulness to the residents when you yourself are feeling sometimes displaced and disoriented?
Oh, that's such a beautiful question. And there's, I have a lot of respect for the work that you're doing in your team. Again, I'm saying this with a lot of humility, but if I could offer anything, I would say there's a relationship with ourself that is underdeveloped, in that we are very giving and understanding and loving and compassionate to other people. And often we neglect our own feelings, or we are self-flagellating instead of kind and validating. And validating is such an important tool, but it's so tricky to do. And it's not fixing or making better, but just to give space. Maybe every time you leave one person's room to enter another, like when you're crossing that doorway, you might just check in and literally peek in and see, how am I doing? What am I feeling? Where am I at? And then offer just a moment of kindness to honor where individually you're at. And again, not fixing it, but just seeing, today I woke up really sad, Habib, just been really sad all morning. And some days I'm really happy. And in fact, most days I'm really happy, but today I'm sad. And that's okay. A flower doesn't bloom all year round. But in moving through my day, I'm holding space for my own sadness. And that's different than showing up in a way that pretends it's not there. And maybe that can help in any small way. I feel badly because I'm taking up, I think, more time than I was allocated, and this is a really short time you guys have together. So
thank you so much, Dr. Choi. It was a pleasure having you on the program today. And we hope to have you for a longer period of time in the future.
I'd love to be back.
Thank you so much.
Session,
Bye.
everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah. Over to you, Dr. Taher.
Thank you, Dr. Abdul Hamid. I have now the main speaker of this meeting, Steve Abram. Steve Abram is the person who's been already familiar with some of you, who was here to release my book on January 5th. I thank him to be coming again to help me and be present when sharing his mindfulness. For Steve Abram, sharing is not just the empathy and equity he demonstrates. His meaning of mindfulness is awareness. And with this awareness, I am able to understand how good a person Steve Abram is. Steve is the principal consultant of Lighthouse Consulting, and he has been the executive director of Federation of Ontario Public Libraries. He has been the head of the many library organizations, and in the information industry, he has been almost for 40 years. So he is a well-known personality all over the globe, and I welcome Steve to tell us more about the meaning of mindfulness in a time of turbulence. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Mohammed, and thank you, Abdul Hamid, for inviting me. I'm going to start off, one, acknowledging that we're on the lands of Turtle Island. In my hometown, we're governed by the Dish with One Spoon Treaty, which is a wonderful name for a treaty. It means we only have one spoon and we have to share the dish. And this is a philosophy that I think is exceedingly amazing. And I've seen the wampum belt that sanctifies this treaty at the Royal Ontario Museum. Secondly, I need to acknowledge, and I don't know if I'm the only one, but and I truly admire Ellen asking us to open our video so that we can see each other, because it's part of our humanity. One thing is said, but 100 things are understood by seeing each other. And one of the things CEED proposes and encourages is really seeing each other, the person inside the peanut. And how do we become so amazing? So, and everyone is amazing. And so I sit there and say, I've had my long life. I acknowledge that I'm a cis white male and I've benefited from enormous privilege, but I also read Spider-Man comics, and with enormous privilege comes enormous responsibility. And how do we ensure things? So my father raised me to be very, very liberal, which to me is just the basis of humanity, humaneness. And so in the late 60s, when I was just a teenager, We worked to, my dad and I worked to lobby for with Pierre Trudeau, lobby for in the Liberal Party for the decriminalization of being gay. And that continued a thread in my life where I spent the early 80s with a small group of people, ensuring that when our Constitution was repatriated, that full LGBTQS rights were included, that Indigenous rights were included, and the rights for women were included. And that led my wife and I to found Canada's first feminist co-op, where we continue to live to this day. So even though I worked in the capitalist private sector for most of my career, I always maintained balance by ensuring that we did things that worked. But then we have this wonderful turbulent time, and I don't think it's a mistake to go through turbulence such as the pandemic caused, and now monkeypox and Ukrainian wars, enormous amounts of challenges to us that focuses us in a right-headed, reframed way on our values. And how do we live our values in our world of librarianship and use the tools at our disposal, whether it's balanced collection development, pulling out all voices, ensuring our programs are welcoming. How do we make that happen and ensure that we're mindful of the communities we serve? As Ellen will know, probably know, at the University of Toronto, we used to have a suicide center, and we changed it to a wellness center. No one wants to be seen going into a suicide center. So being mindful, how do we make it welcoming? How do we ensure who are the highest risk individuals? So our highest risk individuals in universities are LGBTQS, for obvious reasons, since they come from small towns and often find their first life in a bigger population center, find their real selves. People who are first generation in university, less support systems, more work to ensure that they are well balanced and welcomed and aware of what's going on in a coaching kind of way. And lastly, people from small towns have one of our highest incidents. So how do we identify in a mindful way paths to ensure that we're not just mindful and say, oh, well, I seek to improve myself, but how can my improved self help my community of learners in high schools, of scholars in university, of citizens and residents in my community? And I do this because my children and my granddaughter, here's my granddaughter, though she be little, she be fierce. And we're raising, like, my Father's Day present from her mother was to go to a drag bar and see a drag show. And I couldn't have been happier when Sage said, I'm bringing my microphone. And she sang along with all the drag queens. And her favorite song is Alicia Keys' Girl on Fire. And I'm sitting there going, how do we, this isn't just a generational issue, but how do we represent and reflect our communities in a thoughtful way? It's one thing to know our own values. It's quite another thing to implement them. And so when we talk about mindfulness, we need to look at, what does mindfulness look like? It looks like listening. I struggle with this. I am the classic older cis white male. I interrupt. I overtalk. I recognize that in myself. But how do I show respect? Well, respect is showed through listening. It's showed through welcoming. It's seeing someone outside your group of any race or color or gender identification or whatever, and inviting them in a welcoming way without calling them out. Seeing the person, not just the label. And that's a challenge. And I struggle with it. But the fact that I struggle with it means I'm aware of where I need to be in our largely mainstream Western dominated culture in Canada, in the United States, wherever. So first, we need to stop glamorizing some things. 80-hour work weeks, burning ourselves out, working all your life without balance. Get balance, get more of it, get some of it. But the balance, when we're being thoughtful, is how do I place myself in places where I'm going to meet diversity? My friend group in my childhood was a bunch of people in the same, mostly the same class, race as I am, in a suburban white neighborhood of Toronto. And Toronto has changed. We are about the most diverse city in the world, according to the United Nations. And it's wonderful, but how do I suck in that joy, suck in and celebrate? You know, when I go for food, we can't just go for Chinese food. There's 100 different kinds of Asian food in Toronto. If I want to go for Middle Eastern food, there's 100 different kinds of Middle Eastern food. Food is the great leveler. How do you create welcoming? Do we do the Canadian standard of having a meeting with donuts because donuts are our national food? Or do we say, oh, look at that, it's hummus dip, it's baba ganoush, it's sushi. It's whatever shows that we're subtly welcoming not just diversity and not just equity and not just inclusion, but we're actually putting it into action. So some of our habits need to be thought through and saying, yes, occasionally we'll have donuts because I love donuts. I'm Canadian. But occasionally we need to put something in differently. So we'll start with ourselves, understand ourselves, but then be mindful to take in the perspectives of our community members. It's the iceberg theory. You all know that 10% of the iceberg is above the water and the rest of it's below. That's the same, that's the metaphor for people. We cannot judge someone by their color, their religion, their gender identification, their sexuality. We can't make that label a judgment. We need to say everyone is welcome, and how do we create welcoming strategies so everyone can be their whole selves? Everyone can be their scholar. Everyone can be their student. Everyone can be their artist, their performer, their whatever. I choose to do it by participating in charities that support underprivileged males. And so I belong to a charity board where we use hip hop and rap poetry and rap music to deal with a segment of society, and it's not limited to that, but to deal with a segment of society where those performance arts create a space for non-sports oriented kids and the traditional, oh, he plays great basketball, to actually move on to university. We have a 70% success rate in getting them into higher education from a high-risk community. I'm also involved in a halfway house for LGBTQS people. And how do you show them the path, create a room for them to talk and have facilitators, but how do we make sure that they find things? So if we've got a trans woman, how do we create workshops on how to modulate her voice so that she ends up feeling more comfortable in her real identity? So here's some of the green flags on relationships. We're always talking about red flags, which frames it in a negative way. How do we avoid negativity and framing things? So all my nonprofit corporations that I'm on the board of used to call themselves nonprofit corporations, because that's what the Ontario statute says. I get them to change the language to public benefit corporations, so that we talk about what public benefits are we doing? Are we creating better community vitality? Are we creating better social cohesion? Are we creating opportunities where people do not need to engage in negative behavior like drugs and alcohol and crime? So these I put this up on my Facebook today. If you friend me on Facebook, you'll see it. And I'll put these slides up on my blog, which is Stephen's Lighthouse, which OCLC tells me it's the highest traffic blog in librarianship internationally. So frame things. When it rains, look for the rainbow. When it's night, look for the stars. And for me, when it's morning, look for coffee. I'm doing this inside. Normally, I would do it on my balcony with my flowers, because my flowers on my balcony soothe my soul the way the art on my walls does. And by going to art galleries, I wash my soul. I wash my stress. But they're cutting down the 50-year-old maple tree below my balcony that made my balcony feel like a treehouse, but the wind blew all the branches, several branches off it last week. And so I'm sad about it, but then I reframed it and said, we're going to plant a tree that at my age, I will never enjoy the full shade of. And I love that metaphor because I plant trees that don't, like, you know, as a cis male, I benefit from LGBTQS and anti-racism and Black Lives Matter. I benefit from that, even though I don't directly benefit. I live in a better society because of it. Why do I support Ukraine? And why am I volunteering at the International Criminal Court? And why do I occasionally post things about Trump? Because I fight evil in the world. And I look at what is the action we need to do. And so Ukrainian refugees are a thing, and my wife and I support 25 Syrian refugees that we organized our neighbors into a group and made sure that we could be mindful of something we cared about. Yes, we're not dealing with the 10 million displaced Syrians, but we are dealing with the 25 we can make a difference for, and we can show as a model that things can work. And so when you get out of this Zoom meeting, you're left with your thoughts again. Your thoughts aren't to be addressed to say, how do I make myself comfortable? One question we ask ourselves is, how do I take action with these thoughts? Can I make a difference for one person, two people? Can I say something nice to someone who I don't know is having a bad day? And how do I understand religion? I have my spiritualism. I have other friends who have strong faiths. I admire anyone with a value system, and I don't know many religions that don't share the 10 Commandments. They're pretty standard. But truths can be found in them all. They overlap way more. How do we ensure that happens? And then how do I create a work-life balance between spirituality, caring, raising children, coaching my adult children? And, you know, it's not hard to enjoy my granddaughter, but it's important to me that she gets inculcated with a value system that is my family value system for generations. We need to find our tribes, speak our truths, see who sticks around. Those are the people who get a spot in your blanket fort. How do you find your tribe? I found it in librarianship. You couldn't find a more left-wing profession if you tried. We may be fiscally conservative, but we care enough to do the very best, one client at a time. And like, we call ourselves librarians because research magician isn't a great official title, although I know a few people who've done it. How do we confront bad things in equity and diversity? Like, you know, just when someone says, I don't want that book there, like, you know, gay kids read thousands of books about straight characters, yet they still grow up gay. And we're worried that if Billy reads just one book with a penguin with two dads, he's going to walk up the next day and ask Brad to the prom. It's just fundamentally stupid. And those of us who have those critical thinking skills and inculcate those critical thinking skills into our spaces, into our programs, into our collections, we're ready to go. And then we need to reframe burnout. Burnout isn't burnout, it's exploitation. It could be self-exploitation or it could be employer exploitation, but it's about worker feeling, and it draws our attention to the worker practices and policies which require structural solutions. So after a time of turbulence where we did work from home and work at the office and we need to rebalance now, how do we have that conversation? When do we need to be face-to-face at a conference or in a meeting? And when can it be a memo? All my career, a friend wrote a book, You Don't Manage a Company by Memo, but everyone tries to do that. And now they do it now we would name the book, You Don't Run a Company by Email. However, if we're mindful, we need to know, does someone need to listen and absorb this and we need a conversation? Or is it just information transfer? And we need to get better at understanding how these things are. And yes, we should celebrate our top players and our best. Awards are given by our associations and others to be able to point to certain role models of someone who's achieved something great and how they did it. But everything that's underneath that, and when you look at the CEED programs for the next little while, they're showing how to talk about these issues in our workplaces. And we need more water and sun. We're basically a houseplant with complicated emotions. Although I do believe in the sentientness of plants. And when you see a forest of trees and one tree dies, the other trees still tend to and try and feed the roots of the dying tree. So there's some sentientness there that's really important. And it's avoiding the squeaky wheels. You have someone in your workplace who is the black hole of emotion, sucking the life of out of your workplace. I see this a lot in academic situations. Sometimes they're smart and they put them in the office as far away as they can be from the other people. But let's not be dictated by the squeaky wheel. Let's ensure that we fluoresce and bring to the surface our values and have those values conversations. When I'm helping my clients with strategic plans, the values conversation is really important, not just a throwaway. Lived values are what I'm looking for. And what kind of joyous experiences can we provide to our community? I get joy from my career, the intellectual rigor of librarianship, research, information, the critical nature of how we fight Fox News. And as the exemplar of bad thinking and bad behavior, how do we make that work? And how do we deal with a fundamentally extroverted population? Our field is about 70% introverted. And I've always worked in those fields. Computer systems, publishing, and librarianship are the rare fields that are mostly introverted. 70% of the normal human population, the average human population, is extroverted. So how do we develop the skills to move forward on how we use our skills? And introverts do it better. I have zero introversion in every psych test they've ever given me. However, I have more respect for the introverts who actually plan and figure things out and do the detail. So believe in your own worth, own your agency, understand your core values. Know what's non-negotiable. For me, racism is non-negotiable, and I'll call it out in every meeting. Deal breakers, know them. Assert without apologies. Reinforce and repeat if challenged. We need to say something 7 times for it to stick. Implement practically and safely. Exit when you're not respected, but don't just exit. Exit with your voice. Say, I'm feeling threatened here. I am going to have to leave if this does not stop, and then leave. Save yourself and prioritize your own self-care, but make sure that you return to actually address the problems in the workplace. Remember, empty minds make the most noise. I no longer listen to what people say. I watch what they do. Behavior does not lie. You can say you're for something and then do the complete opposite. So when a door closes, knock on it a few times. If it still doesn't open, let it stay closed. These are not just about periods, they're about commas. Know when something is over and move on. When life shuts a door, open it again. It's a door, that's how they work. I'm not afraid of werewolves or vampires or haunted hotels. I'm afraid of what real human beings do to other real human beings. And how do we create the structures, the reporting mechanisms, the whistleblowers to deal with stuff? And how do we hold feet to the fire to deal with it? Diversity makes for a rich tapestry, and we must understand that all the threads of the tapestry are equal in value, no matter what their color. But value doesn't mean equal contribution. It means valued contribution. And we're getting rid of the passive aggressiveness. Let's have some fun in our professional development. I love it when we put mini golf around the stacks. It's more team building than anything else. And you suddenly see staff with smiles. Never get so busy making a living that you forget to make a life. And don't think that when you're making a living, you aren't living for that possibly 7.5 hours a day you're engaged in your passion for your work. Equity is a choice, inclusion is an action, belonging is an outcome. The structural piece is being welcoming, and welcoming looks like listening, invitation, and moving forward to say, how do we bring in an older voice? How do we bring in a younger voice? How do we bring a voice from not a different community, another community that's valid in our space? And let's put positive energy out, not negative energy out. And positive energy brings back reciprocation. If people are being mean to you and you treat them positively, I have found that it actually does better. So she believed she could, but she was tired. So she rested, and you know what? The world went on and it was okay. She knew she could try again tomorrow. So there's my that's a grandson picture, but just like the tree that we will plant, that I never live under the shade on, can I make a contribution to the world that allows us to make one little progressive step forward, that my life will have had meaning and I will have had joy? You can't see the whole staircase, just take a first step. Keep calm, collaborate, and I will stop sharing. And I don't know what time it is. Oh, we got some time for questions. So Mohammed and Abdul Hamid, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. This was a really enlightening piece of advice, suggestions, insights. There's so many things that were all combined into your talk. So thank you so much, Stephen. Any questions? I'll leave it open to the floor. Any questions for Stephen?
দাঁড়াও, মিটিংটা ভিডিওটা অফ করি। জয়েন উইথ ভিডিও বলছে, ভিডিওটা অফ হয়ে রয়েছে না?
Anybody? Any questions? Stephen, if there was, if while people are thinking about questions, if there was anything that, especially during these times of turbulence, what we have just gone through, and it appears we are coming out of it. We're not really sure how we are going to come out of it. Moving forward, I know you have given so many different suggestions. If there was one thing that you would tell people, the audience here, to focus on, what would that be?
Many of us have access to people under 25. And in the early days of the pandemic, public libraries did a wonderful job of calling every patron who was at home, a senior. They're just amazing things. And we instantly run to dealing with senior social isolation, dealing with those high-risk groups. And that was wonderful. I'm not saying don't do that. However, the people who have the most issues with how the pandemic has treated them are those who were pivoted to their entire life being massively disrupted, dealing with challenges on adapting to e-learning, and they did a wonderful job. However, they are so stressed out and their mental health. I've done about 24 focus groups across the last 2 years for my clients with teen groups. These kids are struggling. And anything you can do in academic settings, and high school settings and kids, to actually find out how they're really doing. They tend to be quite private. So I find things like, tell me about your tattoo, and you'll find an amazing story underlying that tattoo of something they value and something that's important to them. And if you do it without judgment and all that sort of stuff, I find that sitting there saying, just how are you dealing with this, and not accepting the I'm fine response. Like, saying, or letting them talk about, how are your friends doing? A lot of kids say, well, some of my friends are struggling with this. We all know when people say a friend is struggling with this, it echoed with them because they're struggling with it too. So I really think if we said, we're the adults in the room, we've been through some of this. I've been through the massive inflation of the 80s and can talk about it with my kids. I've been through people losing their houses. I've been through a bunch of stuff, and I know it gets better. And I love the it gets better stuff, but it gets better. But it doesn't get better when your horizon is unknown. I have more time looking into the past than I do currently looking into the future. There's a hard stop for me. And they have more time looking into the future than looking into the past. They have less emotional resources, and they haven't fully found themselves yet. Adult males don't become mostly complete with our full frontal lobe until we're 25. Women a little earlier. It's a challenge for all of them to struggle with handling 3 difficult concepts at once. When we're teenagers, we can only handle 2. And when we're toddlers, we can only handle 1. Like, when you look at a 14-year-old teen boy and he breaks into tears when you just ask him to clean his room, it's because you just got over the 2 limit. He was thinking about 2 different things, and then he either gets angry or cries because he's got cognitive overload. And girls suffer the same thing. So now we're seeing people crying at a much older age. And I think it's good that this generation has been raised to be more open, less racist. The good ones have, and some of them need retreading. But how do we give them the opportunity to talk to an adult who is not their parent, who may know stuff that their parent may not have the resources to do? And in my academic setting, that's particularly important for my first generation scholars, because they can't go to their parents about how to handle an academic setting and what you do, because their parents don't have that experience. Or generally, your parents are cisgendered. If you're gay, and how you move through the world and how you successfully gain respect and tolerance and find your full self, how do you talk to someone who has challenged that? And so, to me, I think we need to, yes, continue to be concerned about the seniors, continue to be concerned about ourselves because we have the resources to do it, but focus on opportunities to talk to emerging adults.
Thank you, Stephen. There's one question. It's about a resource. Don't overthink it. How librarians can conquer perfectionism with mindfulness. Is that accessible anywhere? I tried to find it online. Is it an article? And perhaps Dr. Taher can respond to that, if not now, a little later, and get in touch with Ruth and share the information with Ruth Cody. So with that, I know we are running short of time, and we have one quick short item remaining, and I'll transfer it back to Dr. Mohammad Taher to wrap up and complete that final one item that we are remaining with. Dr. Mohammad Taher.
Thank you, Dr. Abdul Hamid. Now I request Dr. Kishore Satpathy to inaugurate the first issue of the newsletter of CEEED. Dr. Kishore Satpathy, please.
Thank you, Dr. Tahir, and thank you, Stephen. It was nice listening to you. In fact, in India, most of the librarians are not aware of these things. Still, Indian librarians has to go a longer way. But anyway, I'm taking this opportunity to introduce the first issue of our newsletter. Just 1 minute. Is my screen visible?
We can see a slide on the screen. Somebody shared a
So
newsletter.
this is the introducing the first issue of the newsletter of Center for Excellence on Empathy, Equity, and Diversity. Hope this will go a long way, and I hope our newsletter will help to bridge the gap between life and digital inequalities and digital distress. And I hope the readers will get some more information on empathy, equity, and diversity. And the first issue of this newsletter is having 4 pages. So these are the 4 pages. Thank you very much, Dr. Tahir, and the entire team for providing me the information for compiling this newsletter. And thank you. And I think the newsletter will be circulated by Dr. Tahir shortly to all of our members and to others. Thank you very much. Over to Dr. Tahir.
Thank you, Dr. Kishore. You are the editor of the newsletter. So I thank your team of designers, the digital designers who developed this newsletter into a good looking and good feeling like it should give for empathy, equity, and diversity. You brought the basic highlights of the accommodation of the inclusiveness for anyone to read the newsletter, whether they are handicapped or whether they're disabled or whatever. Thank you very much. And now it's my time to thank you, speakers, Steve and Dr. Ellen, for taking your time, giving us your insights of what mindfulness means. Mindfulness, now I have learned a lot from you, your speakers, and I hope that this will be good for us, for our daily life, for our professional life, and for us to build better skills in dealing with whatever we do, in whatever we meet and whatever we see in life. I thank the board members who are here because their support and their presence, academic and moral support, and their involvement in this Center for Equity, Empathy, and Diversity is more important. And they have very nicely and supportively joined the team. I welcome them, and they are all very energetic and academically involved in the areas that they specialize. I also thank all of you from wherever you are, I know, from India, from Indonesia, from Australia, from New Zealand, from UK, from anywhere and everywhere. I welcome and appreciate you spending so much of time in the late hours. Mine is midday, so I'm not so sleepy, but you have been burning the midnight lamp now. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. We hope we'll be joining the next webinar the next month of July 20th. We have this July 20th webinar on staff wellness, well-being, because meditation, mindfulness, and empathy requires that we not only care for the outreach, not only talk about people who are outside. Most of the libraries, most of the organizations, most of the groups talk about the outside communities. Let's start spoken about the internal, in reach. So the next month, the webinar will be on staff well-being, and the next month of August, we'll have a webinar on intercultural, interfaith literacy. There are many good samples from all over the world that I'm trying to bring some good speakers who will show how they are disseminating information to promote harmony, to promote peace, and so on. Thank you very much. Stay connected, stay safe, and wish you all the best. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
If you have any questions, I am here, so I'm not going. Any questions for me? Thank you, everyone. Thanks a lot. Take care.